20 years of absolute silence. A prisoner who witnessed murder but chose protection over justice. When Marcus Thompson finally spoke, his 4 words brought down an entire prison system. This is the most incredible witness story ever told. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking prisoner revelations. Marcus Thompson, 57 years old, served 21 years for armed robbery. Witnessed a murder in 1996 and chose complete silence for 20 years. Known as the Mute, the prisoner who refused to speak until justice demanded his voice. David Kim, 22 years old. Convicted of check fraud, serving 3 years. A brilliant accounting mind who discovered financial corruption. His questions about missing money cost him his life in 1996. Sergeant William Kowalski, 15-year prison veteran. Ran corruption networks inside Millfield Prison. Orchestrated David Kim's murder to protect his criminal operations. Finally brought to justice decades later. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, prison psychologist. Spent 20 years trying to understand Marcus's silence. Conducted hundreds of sessions with the man who wouldn't speak, never knowing he was protecting a murder secret. For 20 years, inmate Marcus Thompson refused to speak a single word. Guards thought he was mentally ill. Other inmates thought he was crazy. But when he finally broke his silence, his first words exposed the biggest corruption scandal in prison history. Millfield Correctional Facility, Ohio, 1995. The autumn rain hammered against the concrete walls of Block C as Marcus Thompson walked through the prison gates for the first time. At 28 years old, he was sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery, a crime he had committed in desperation after losing his construction job and facing eviction. Marcus had never been violent before, never been in serious trouble with the law. He was what prison officials called a soft fish, someone who would likely struggle to survive in the harsh ecosystem of maximum security incarceration. Marcus was assigned to cell 247 in Block C, a housing unit known for its mix of medium security inmates and occasional overflow from higher security blocks. His cellmate was Tony Rodriguez, a 35-year-old serving time for drug trafficking. Tony had been at Millfield for 3 years and knew the unofficial rules that governed daily life behind the walls. "Listen up, rookie," Tony told Marcus on his first night. "Keep your head down, don't ask questions, and never see anything that ain't your business. You do that, you might make it out of here in one piece." Marcus nodded, thinking he understood what Tony meant. Prison was dangerous, and staying invisible was the key to survival. What Marcus didn't realize was that Tony was giving him advice that would literally save his life and doom him to 2 decades of silence. The first few months at Millfield passed without major incident. Marcus kept to himself, worked in the prison laundry, and slowly adapted to the rhythms of incarcerated life. He wrote letters to his sister Sarah, his only family, and attended the occasional educational program. He was a model prisoner, earning good time credits and staying out of trouble. But Marcus was observant, too observant for his own good. He noticed things that other inmates either missed or chose to ignore. He saw how certain guards treated specific prisoners with unusual deference. He observed how some inmates seemed to have access to contraband that should have been impossible to obtain. Most troubling, he witnessed several instances of guards conducting unofficial business during night shifts when supervision was minimal. The hierarchy at Millfield wasn't just about inmates versus staff. There was a complex web of relationships that involved corrupt guards, powerful inmate leaders, and outside criminal organizations. Marcus began to understand that the prison wasn't just containing crime. It was facilitating it. The turning point came on March 15, 1996, during Marcus's 8th month at Millfield. Marcus was returning from his evening shift in the laundry when he heard raised voices coming from the end of C Block's main corridor. Normal protocol would have been to return to his cell and mind his own business. But something about the tone of the argument made Marcus pause and listen. He recognized one of the voices as belonging to David Kim, a 22-year-old Korean-American inmate serving time for check fraud. David was quiet, intelligent, and had been working on an appeal of his conviction with help from a law student volunteer. He kept to himself and rarely caused trouble. The other voice belonged to Sergeant William Kowalski, a 15-year veteran of the prison system known for his aggressive management style and connections to certain inmate power structures. Kowalski was feared by both inmates and newer guards, and rumors circulated about his involvement in various illegal activities within the prison. From his position around the corner, Marcus could hear the conversation clearly. "You need to stop asking questions about the commissary books," Kowalski was saying, his voice low but menacing. "Some things ain't your business, college boy." "I'm just trying to understand the discrepancies," David replied, his voice steady but clearly nervous. "The numbers don't add up. Money is being diverted from inmate accounts." "Listen carefully," Kowalski said. "You drop this accountant bullshit right now, or you're gonna find yourself in situations that ain't gonna be good for your health. You understand me?" Marcus should have walked away. Tony's advice echoed in his head. Never see anything that ain't your business. But something about the threat in Kowalski's voice and the courage he heard in David's response made him stay. "I can't just ignore what I've found," David said. "Inmates are having money stolen from their accounts. They have families on the outside depending on that money. It's not right. What happened next would haunt Marcus for the next 20 years. Kowalski's voice turned ice cold. "Wrong answer, kid." Marcus heard the sound of a scuffle, then David's voice, higher now with fear. "Stop! What are you doing?" Marcus edged closer to the corner, knowing he should run but unable to leave David to face whatever was happening alone. When he peered around the corner, what he saw changed his life forever. Kowalski had David pressed against the wall near the stairwell that led to the basement mechanical rooms. David was struggling, but Kowalski was much larger and stronger. Two other inmates Marcus recognized as part of Kowalski's network, Raymond Big Ray Williams and Eddie Torino, were approaching from the other direction. "Take him downstairs," Kowalski ordered. "Make it look like an accident. Kid fell down the stairs, hit his head, shit happens." Marcus watched in horror as Big Ray and Eddie grabbed David and began forcing him toward the stairwell. David tried to call out, but Eddie clamped a hand over his mouth. Kowalski followed them, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. He had just witnessed the beginning of a murder. David Kim was about to be killed because he had discovered evidence of financial corruption at Millfield, and Marcus was the only witness. For a moment, Marcus considered running for help, but who could he tell? Kowalski was a sergeant with 15 years on the job. Big Ray and Eddie were powerful inmates with connections throughout the prison. Who would believe the word of a first-time offender against such established figures in the prison hierarchy? More importantly, who could Marcus trust? If Kowalski was willing to kill David for asking questions about money, what would he do to Marcus for witnessing the murder? Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would pretend he had seen nothing. 20 minutes later, alarms began sounding throughout Block C. David Kim had been found dead at the bottom of the basement stairs, his neck broken from what appeared to be a tragic fall. The incident was investigated by internal affairs and ruled an accidental death. David's family was told that their son had slipped on wet stairs and fallen. Marcus said nothing. The official investigation was perfunctory. Sergeant Kowalski filed a report stating that David had been agitated during their last conversation, possibly distressed about his legal case. Security camera footage from the basement was mysteriously corrupted. The two inmates who found the body, Big Ray and Eddie, provided statements confirming that they had discovered David after hearing a crash from the stairwell. No one asked Marcus if he had seen anything. No one suspected that a quiet robbery convict might have witnessed the crime. But Marcus knew the truth, and the weight of that knowledge began to crush him. In the days following David's death, Marcus noticed that Kowalski was watching him more carefully than before. Nothing overt, just occasional eye contact in the corridor, a longer than necessary pause during routine inspections. Marcus couldn't be sure if Kowalski suspected he had witnessed something, or if his paranoia was making him imagine threats that didn't exist. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Marcus found himself unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to concentrate on simple tasks. He jumped at unexpected sounds and found excuses to avoid areas of the prison where he might encounter Kowalski or his associates. 2 weeks after David's death, Marcus made another life-altering decision. He would stop talking entirely. It started as a practical strategy. If he didn't speak, he couldn't accidentally reveal what he had seen. If he remained completely silent, no one could trick him into saying something that might expose his knowledge of the murder. Marcus began communicating only through gestures and written notes when absolutely necessary. He told other inmates and guards that he was having difficulty processing David's death and needed time to cope with the trauma. This explanation was accepted without question. Prison was a harsh environment, and emotional breakdowns were not uncommon. What Marcus didn't anticipate was how natural the silence would become. As days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, not speaking became his new normal. The silence was protective, like armor against a world that had become too dangerous for words. Prison officials referred Marcus to psychiatric services after 3 months of voluntary mutism. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a prison psychologist, conducted numerous evaluations trying to understand Marcus's condition. "Marcus," Dr. Walsh said during one session, "I know you can hear me, and I believe you can speak. Your silence appears to be a conscious choice rather than a medical condition. Can you help me understand why you've chosen not to talk?" Marcus wrote on a piece of paper, nothing to say. Dr. Walsh tried various therapeutic approaches over the following months. She hypothesized that Marcus was suffering from adjustment disorder, depression, or post-traumatic stress related to his incarceration. She was partially correct. Marcus was indeed traumatized, but she had no way of knowing that his trauma stemmed from witnessing a murder rather than from the general stress of prison life. "Marcus shows signs of selective mutism," Dr. Walsh wrote in her reports. "He appears mentally competent and physically capable of speech but has chosen silence as a coping mechanism. Recommend continued psychological monitoring and voluntary participation in therapeutic programs." As months became years, Marcus's silence became legendary throughout Millfield. Inmates dubbed him the Mute, and wild theories circulated about why he refused to speak. Some believed he was mentally ill. Others thought he was a former undercover cop who had been exposed and was afraid of retaliation. A few suspected he was protecting someone or something. but no one guessed the truth. Guards found Marcus frustrating but ultimately harmless. He followed orders communicated through gestures, completed his work assignments without complaint, and never caused disciplinary problems. His silence actually made him easier to manage than many vocal inmates who constantly complained about conditions or requested meetings with supervisors. Marcus's sister, Sarah, visited monthly during his first year of silence. She was devastated by her brother's condition and pleaded with him to speak, to explain what had happened to him in prison. Marcus would only write brief notes. "I'm okay. Don't worry. Love you." Sarah brought in private doctors, sought legal advice about her brother's treatment, and even contacted advocacy groups about potential abuse. But without Marcus's cooperation, there was little anyone could do. He wasn't being mistreated by prison standards, and he wasn't requesting help or making complaints. As Marcus's silence stretched into its second year, something unexpected happened. He began to find peace in his wordless existence. The constant fear that had initially motivated his silence gradually gave way to a different kind of awareness. Without the obligation to engage in conversation, Marcus became an observer of prison life in ways that other inmates couldn't match. He watched human behavior with the detachment of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Marcus saw patterns of corruption that extended far beyond what he had witnessed on the night of David's murder. He observed drug transactions facilitated by guards, witnessed the systematic abuse of vulnerable inmates, and identified networks of illegal activity that involved staff members at every level of the prison hierarchy. But Marcus also saw moments of genuine humanity. Guards who treated inmates with dignity, inmates who protected weaker prisoners from predators, and small acts of kindness that flourished despite the harsh environment. His silence gave him a unique perspective on the psychology of incarceration. He understood how power functioned in the microcosm of prison society, how fear and loyalty were used as tools of control, and how institutional corruption could flourish when good people chose to look the other way. By his third year of silence, Marcus had become something like a confessor figure among certain inmates. People told him things they wouldn't share with anyone else, perhaps because they knew he couldn't repeat their secrets. Marcus listened without judgment, offering comfort through his presence rather than his words. Younger inmates often sought Marcus out for guidance, communicating their problems through written notes or whispered monologues. Marcus would respond with written advice that was consistently thoughtful and practical. He became known as someone who could be trusted absolutely, a man whose silence was a guarantee of confidentiality. Prison officials eventually stopped trying to make Marcus speak. After 5 years of voluntary mutism, his psychological evaluations were reduced to annual check-ins where Dr. Walsh would document his continued refusal to communicate verbally while noting his stable mental state and positive behavior. "Subject continues to maintain voluntary silence," Dr. Walsh wrote in 2001. "Shows no signs of mental deterioration or distress. Functions effectively within prison environment. Silence appears to be a permanent adaptive strategy rather than a temporary psychological response." Marcus's original 15-year sentence was reduced to 12 years through good behavior credits. He was scheduled for release in 2007, but something unexpected happened. He didn't want to leave. The outside world had become foreign to Marcus after more than a decade of silence. He had built an identity around being the silent man, and the thought of returning to a society where conversation was expected filled him with anxiety. More importantly, he had never resolved the central trauma of his incarceration. the knowledge that David Kim's murderers had never been brought to justice. Marcus began writing letters to his sister explaining that he wanted to remain in prison until he felt ready to reintegrate into society. This was an unusual request, but not unheard of. Some long-term inmates struggled with the prospect of release and needed additional time to prepare for life outside prison walls. Sarah was heartbroken by Marcus's decision, but she had learned over the years that pressuring her brother to change his mind was futile. She continued her monthly visits, maintaining their relationship through written notes and silent companionship. As Marcus entered his second decade of incarceration, the original players in David Kim's murder began to face consequences for their actions, though not for the crime Marcus had witnessed. Sergeant Kowalski was investigated by the FBI in 2005 for his involvement in a drug trafficking operation that used prison staff to smuggle narcotics into multiple facilities. The investigation revealed a complex network of corruption involving dozens of guards and administrators across the state prison system. During the FBI investigation, agents discovered evidence of financial irregularities dating back to the 1990s, the same type of accounting discrepancies that David Kim had been investigating before his death. While the FBI couldn't prove that David's murder was connected to the broader corruption, they found ample evidence that Kowalski had been involved in criminal activity for years. Kowalski was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy charges. He would spend his remaining years behind bars, though he was never charged with David Kim's murder. Big Ray Williams died of a heart attack in 2008 while serving an extended sentence for assault charges unrelated to David's death. Eddie Torino was transferred to another facility after being involved in a stabbing incident and lost contact with the Millfield population. Marcus watched these developments with a mixture of satisfaction and continued frustration. Justice was being served in a general sense, but David Kim's specific murder remained officially unsolved and forgotten. The decision to finally break his silence came in 2015, triggered by an event that reminded Marcus why he had chosen silence in the first place. A young inmate named Carlos Mendez, serving time for drug possession, had begun asking questions about financial irregularities in the current commissary system. Carlos was intelligent, idealistic, and naive about the dangers of challenging institutional corruption. He reminded Marcus painfully of David Kim. Marcus watched Carlos following the same path that had led to David's death, identifying problems, asking inconvenient questions, and refusing to back down when told to mind his own business. The parallels were so exact that Marcus felt like he was watching history repeat itself. But this time, Marcus was in a position to intervene. After 20 years of voluntary silence, Marcus Thompson walked into the office of Warden Patricia Stevens and spoke his first words since 1996. "I need to report a murder," Marcus said, his voice rusty from disuse but clear and determined. "I've been silent for 20 years because I was afraid. But I can't stay silent while history repeats itself." Warden Stevens was initially skeptical. Marcus's sudden decision to speak after 2 decades of silence seemed implausible, possibly the result of mental breakdown or attention-seeking behavior. But as Marcus began to describe the details of David Kim's murder, details that had never been made public, Stevens realized she was hearing something extraordinary. Marcus provided a complete account of what he had witnessed on March 15, 1996. He named Kowalski, Big Ray, and Eddie as the perpetrators. He explained how David's investigation into financial irregularities had led to his murder. Most importantly, he revealed information about the corruption network that had operated at Millfield for decades. The FBI was called in to investigate Marcus's claims. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, who had led the original investigation into Kowalski's drug trafficking operation, interviewed Marcus extensively. She was impressed by the consistency and detail of his testimony, as well as his ability to provide information that corroborated evidence the FBI had gathered during their earlier investigation. Mr. Thompson's account fills in crucial gaps in our understanding of the corruption network at Millfield, Agent Torres reported. His description of events matches physical evidence and witness statements we collected during the Kowalski investigation. His credibility is enhanced by the fact that he maintained silence for 20 years, clearly at great personal cost. Marcus's decision to speak triggered the largest corruption investigation in Ohio prison history. His testimony led to the reopening of David Kim's case, which was reclassified from accidental death to homicide. While Kowalski was already serving a federal sentence, additional charges were filed related to David's murder. The investigation also exposed ongoing corruption at Millfield and other facilities throughout the state system. Dozens of staff members were arrested or fired. Administrative procedures were overhauled. The financial irregularities that David Kim had originally discovered were finally addressed, resulting in the recovery of hundreds of thousands of dollars that had been stolen from inmate accounts over the years. Marcus's courage in breaking his silence saved Carlos Mendez from potentially following David Kim's path. Carlos was quietly transferred to a different facility for his protection, and the financial irregularities he had identified were investigated and resolved without retaliation. Media coverage of Marcus's story captured national attention. The man who had been silent for 20 years became a symbol of both the corruption that could flourish in institutional settings and the power of individual conscience to eventually triumph over fear. Marcus Thompson's silence was a form of survival, wrote journalist Amanda Chen, no relation to David Kim, in a widely shared article about the case. But his decision to finally speak was an act of heroism. He sacrificed 2 decades of his life to protect a secret, then sacrificed his protection to save others. Marcus was released from Millfield in 2016 after serving 21 years of his original 15-year sentence. The additional time had been voluntary, but Marcus felt it was time to rejoin the world outside prison walls. His reintegration into society was challenging but ultimately successful. Marcus struggled initially with the expectations of normal conversation after so many years of silence, but he gradually rebuilt his ability to engage with the world through words. He moved in with his sister Sarah, who had never given up hope that her brother would eventually speak again. Their relationship, strengthened by years of patient, silent communication, provided the foundation for Marcus's return to society. Marcus became an advocate for prison reform and government transparency. He spoke at conferences and testified before legislative committees about the need for independent oversight of correctional facilities. His unique perspective, as someone who had observed institutional corruption from the inside for 2 decades, gave his testimony particular weight. "Silence protected me," Marcus told a Senate committee investigating prison conditions in 2018. But silence also protected the system that killed David Kim and threatened countless others. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is remain quiet when you should speak up. Marcus also worked with law enforcement training programs. helping officers understand how institutional corruption develops and how it can be prevented. His insights into the psychology of prison life proved valuable for administrators trying to create more ethical and effective correctional systems. David Kim's family, who had spent 20 years believing their son died in an accident, finally learned the truth about his murder. While the knowledge was painful, they expressed gratitude to Marcus for his eventual courage in revealing what had happened. Marcus Thompson gave us answers we thought we would never have, David's mother said in a statement to the media. His silence was understandable given the circumstances, but his decision to finally speak gave us the closure we needed. As of 2024, Marcus Thompson continues to work as an advocate and consultant on criminal justice issues. He has written a book about his experience titled 20 Years of Silence: How Fear Nearly Defeated Justice. The book provides a detailed account of his time at Millfield and his decision to finally break his silence. Marcus's story serves as a reminder of the complex moral choices individuals face when confronted with institutional corruption. His 20-year silence was both a personal survival strategy and a failure of civic courage. His eventual decision to speak was both a personal liberation and an act of heroism that protected others from harm. "I lost 20 years of my voice," Marcus reflected in a recent interview. "But I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait for the right moment to use it." Silence can be a form of resistance, but it can also be a form of complicity. The key is knowing when to transition from one to the other. The corruption network at Millfield was dismantled, but Marcus knows that similar problems exist in correctional facilities across the country. His ongoing work focuses on creating systems that protect whistleblowers and encourage good people to speak up when they witness wrongdoing. Marcus Thompson's 20 years of silence ended with words that brought down a criminal conspiracy and prevented future tragedies. His story proves that it's never too late to find your voice, and that sometimes the most important truths are worth waiting decades to tell.